If you've ever stood in a checkout line with your thumb hovering over the payment button, heart beating just a little too fast, feeling something between excitement and dread, this story is for you. That feeling has a name, and it isn't about the price. Today, I want to tell you about a young merchant's apprentice who walked into an old monk's courtyard holding a small velvet pouch, ready to spend everything in it on a single object. He believed he was there to ask for a blessing on his purchase. What he actually received were 5 questions, and 1 sentence, only 7 words long, that he would repeat to himself for the rest of his life. We'll get to those words. But first, you need to understand what was in his hand, and why it felt so heavy. Before we go further, tell me in the comments, what's the last thing you bought that you were excited about for exactly 1 day, and then never thought about again? You might be surprised how many people are about to type the same answer. The town of Amaragat sat where 2 trade roads crossed, and dust from 100 caravans hung permanently in its afternoon light. Kieran was 19, apprenticed to his uncle's silk and spice stall, and he had spent 3 years watching wealthier men walk past him wearing things he did not have. A ring with a blue stone, a belt buckle shaped like a hawk, a walking cane topped with silver, carried by a man who did not appear to need a cane at all. Kieran noticed these things the way a hungry man notices food through a window, not with simple admiration, but with a low, constant ache that lived somewhere behind his ribs, the kind that flared up hardest in the hour just before sleep, when the stall was shuttered and there was nothing left to do but lie on his mat and replay the day's small humiliations. The customer who had looked past him to address his uncle instead. The trader's son who had laughed, not unkindly, at the plainness of his sandals. None of it was cruelty exactly. It was simply the ordinary weather of a town built on visible wealth, and Kieran had never learned how to stand in that weather without feeling smaller for it. He told himself the ache was ambition. He told himself that a man who wanted nothing would never rise in the world, and he had plenty of evidence to point to. His uncle, who had run the same modest stall for 30 years, spoke slowly, dressed plainly, and seemed entirely at peace with both facts. And to Kieran this looked less like contentment than like defeat that had simply stopped struggling. He loved his uncle. He did not want to become him. So when Kieran finally saved enough coin earned from months of extra hours, skipped meals, and a stubborn refusal to spend on anything else, he did not save it for land or tools or his sister's dowry. He saved it for a dagger, not an ordinary one. A ceremonial blade with a handle of carved ivory and a sheath inlaid with hammered copper, the kind carried by merchants who had, in Kieran's mind, arrived. He had seen it in the window of the finest trader in Amaragat for 2 years. He had touched the glass more times than he could count. The night before he planned to buy it, unable to sleep, he walked to the edge of town where an old monk named Devarim lived in a small stone room beside a dry well. Kieran did not go there for wisdom. He told himself he simply couldn't sleep, and the walk helped. But some part of him knew exactly why his feet had carried him there, and it wasn't for exercise. Devarim was awake, as he always seemed to be, sitting outside his door with a clay cup of something that had long gone cold. He looked at the pouch in Kieran's hand before he looked at Kieran's face. "You're not here for tea," Devarim said. It wasn't a question. Kieran sat down across from him, the pouch heavy in his lap, and found himself explaining everything. The dagger, the 2 years of looking through glass, the ache behind his ribs that never seemed to go away no matter how much he told himself it would, once he finally had the thing he wanted. But what he didn't know was that Devarim had once owned 3 such daggers himself, back when he was a merchant of considerable success, before the years that turned him into the man now sitting on a cold stone step with nothing but a clay cup and a dry well. "Before you buy anything," Devarim said, "a wise trader I once knew taught me to ask myself 5 questions. I have never bought a single thing since without asking them first. Some nights they've stopped me. Most nights they haven't, but I have never once regretted asking." Kieran leaned forward. This is where everything changed, though he wouldn't understand how much until later. "The first question," Devarim said, "is this. Do I want this thing, or do I want what I imagine it will make people feel about me?" Kieran opened his mouth to answer quickly, and then closed it again. He thought of the merchant with the silver cane. He thought of how he pictured himself walking through the market with the dagger at his hip, and how in that picture he was always watching himself be watched. The second question, Devarim continued, is whether the ache will still be there after I own it. Not whether the object is good, whether the ache, the specific feeling that sent me looking for it, will actually be gone. Remember this detail. It matters later. Kieran sat with that one for a long moment. He thought about the belt he had bought 8 months earlier, the one with the polished brass clasp, the one he had wanted so badly that he had gone without proper meals for 2 weeks to afford it. He tried to remember what it felt like to finally clasp it around his waist for the first time. He found that he could barely remember it at all. The belt was in a drawer now. He hadn't worn it in months. The third question, Devarim said, watching Kieran's face carefully, is what this purchase is asking me to become, not what it will let me do. What it asks me to become and keep becoming in order to keep it, protect it, replace it when it wears out, and want the next thing after it. This one landed differently. Kieran thought about the dagger's sheath, how it would need oiling, how he would worry about scratches, how he had already in his mind begun rehearsing the careful way he would carry it so it wouldn't knock against a table or a doorway. He was preparing to become a man who managed a dagger before he had even purchased one. And this is where everything changed, though the true turn was still a few minutes away. The fourth question, Devarim said, his voice slower now, is who I would be in this exact moment, sitting right here, if I already had everything I was about to buy. Not richer, not admired, just as I am right now, but without the wanting. Who is that person? Kieran tried to picture it and found, to his own surprise, that he couldn't. He had spent so many years picturing himself with things that he had never once tried to picture himself simply as he was, without the ache, without the imagined dagger, without the imagined eyes of the market watching him walk by. The exercise felt strange, almost frightening, like trying to remember a room he had never actually stood in. And the fifth question, Devarim said, setting down his cold cup, is the only one that matters if you cannot answer the other four honestly. It is this: if I already have enough, what am I actually buying? The courtyard was quiet. Somewhere beyond the dry well, a dog barked twice and went silent. Kieran realized his hands had gone still on the pouch in his lap, no longer gripping it the way they had been when he arrived. I don't understand, Kieran said. If I already have enough, then I wouldn't need to buy anything. Devarim smiled for the first time that night, though there was no mockery in it, only a kind of tired kindness that comes from having made the same mistake many times before learning from it. That, he said, is exactly the question. Most men never ask it because the honest answer would cost them the dagger, the belt, the cane, the next thing, and the next. So they keep the ache instead, and call it ambition, because the ache feels more like being alive than sufficiency ever does. He looked at Kieran directly now. You already own the thing you seek, he said. 7 words. Kieran turned them over like stones in his hand. You already own the thing you seek. He wanted to argue. He wanted to point at the empty space at his hip where the dagger should have been, the space he had imagined filled for 2 full years, and say, no, I don't own it. That's precisely the problem. But something in him had gone quiet enough to actually listen, for possibly the first time in a long while. And in that quiet, he understood that Devarim wasn't talking about the dagger at all. He was talking about whatever the dagger had been standing in for, the respect Kieran wanted, the proof he wanted to hold in his hand that he had become someone. The ache that had never once been about ivory or copper, and had always from the very beginning been about something no object could ever actually deliver. That merchant's apprentice is you. Every time you add something to a cart at midnight, hoping the arrival of the package will finally quiet the noise in your chest. He is you every time you check a number in an app and feel, for one brief second, that the number is a verdict on who you are. He is every person who has ever believed that the ache of not enough could be solved by acquiring enough, when the ache was never mathematical to begin with. It was never about the balance in the account. It was about a story you were telling yourself about what you lacked, and objects are very good at pretending to finish that story and very bad at actually finishing it. This is the center of what Devarim was teaching, and it is a single idea, not 5 separate lessons, though it wears 5 different questions, like 5 different masks. The idea is this: attachment is not about the object you want. It is about the identity you believe the object will finally confirm. And no object, no matter how fine the craftsmanship or how many years you saved for it, can confirm an identity, because identity was never something waiting outside you to be purchased. It was something you already carried, the way Kieran already carried enough worth, enough value, enough of a life, long before he ever saved a single coin for a dagger he did not, in the end, need. Sufficiency is not the absence of desire. It is the quiet, internal decision that you are not missing anything essential, made before you go looking for proof in a shop window. Attachment is the opposite decision, made without your permission, over and over, every time you let an object answer a question that only stillness can actually answer. This is easy to hear as a rule about spending less. It isn't. A person can own very little and still be entirely governed by attachment, forever measuring their emptiness against the fullness of others. And a person can own a great deal and still be free of it, if what they hold has stopped being asked to prove anything about who they are. The size of the wanting matters far less than what the wanting is quietly promising you underneath. Safety, belonging, proof that you matter, relief from a fear you haven't looked at directly in years. Objects are extraordinarily convincing stand-ins for those promises, right up until the moment you actually own the object and discover the promise was never inside it to begin with. So the next time you feel the familiar pull toward something you don't yet own, the new device, the nicer coat, the thing that everyone in your circle seems to already have, try this. Before you open your wallet, ask yourself the same 5 questions Kieran carried home that night. Do I want this thing, or do I want what I imagine it will make people feel about me? Will the ache actually be gone once I own it, or will it simply move to the next object in line? What is this purchase asking me to become in order to keep it? Who would I be in this exact moment if I already had everything I'm about to buy? And if I already have enough, what am I actually buying? Tonight, before you sleep, take a few minutes and write down 3 things money cannot buy that you already own. Not abstractions. Specifics. The particular way a friend laughs at your jokes. The fact that your hands still work well enough to write this list. A single memory from this year that had nothing to do with anything you purchased. Let the list be short and honest rather than long and performed. Tomorrow, before your next purchase, no matter how small, pause for 10 seconds and ask only the second question. Will the ache actually be gone once I own this? 10 seconds is not a sacrifice. It is simply enough time for the truth to catch up with the impulse. And once a week, choose one object you already own, something you fought hard to get, something you were once certain would change how you felt about yourself. And simply notice whether it did, not with judgment, with curiosity. This is not about guilt over what you've bought. It is about training your attention to notice the gap between anticipation and reality, so that the next time the ache arrives, you recognize it for what it actually is before it spends your money for you. Kieran did not buy the dagger that night. He walked back to Amara Ghat as the sky began to lighten, the pouch still full in his hand. And for the first time in 2 years, the space at his hip did not feel empty. It felt like his own. He kept the coin for another year, and when he finally spent it, it was on his sister's dowry, a decision that brought him no admiring glances in the market at all, and which he never once regretted, not even on the hardest days that followed. Devarim remained in his small stone room beside the dry well for the rest of his life, owning almost nothing, wanting, by all appearances, even less. People in Amara Ghat who did not know his history sometimes pitied him. They assumed a man with an empty room must be a man with an empty life. They never understood that the emptiness was not a lack. It was a decision made once and renewed daily, and it had cost him 3 ivory-handled daggers and everything he thought those daggers would prove, to finally learn. You are not the ache behind your ribs when you see something you don't have. You are the quiet that remains when you finally stop asking objects to answer questions only you can answer for yourself. You already own the thing you seek. Walk gently toward whatever you buy next, and hold it loosely enough to remember that. If this story gave you even one moment of pause the next time your thumb hovers over a payment button, there are more waiting for you here. Next time, I want to tell you about a king who traded his crown for one night of sleep, and what he asked for in return when he woke. Walk gently, hold loosely,